Hello, Bernardo.
Hi, Mauricio. How are you?
Good. So I think we're ready to start, right?
Yeah, we're ready to start.
We certainly are.
Yeah, we have 363 people connected, so we're super happy to having you here. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Columbia University Energy Symposium. My name is Andres Moncada, and I'm the Symposium's co-director. As a Colombian, as a Latin American, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our speakers today to the panel Energy Transition in Latin America. Our panel is integrated by Mr. Felipe Bayón, CEO of Ecopetrol. Ecopetrol is the largest company in Colombia and one of the most important oil and gas companies in Latin America, with the strategic operations in the US, Brazil, and Mexico. We also have Mr. Bernardo Vargas, CEO of ISA. ISA is the largest transmission company in Latin America and one of the main players in the road concession business also in Latin America. We have Mr. Juan Ricardo Ortega, the CEO of Grupo Energía Bogotá, GEB. GEB operates as an energy holding with a diversified portfolio of power and natural gas utilities and serve customers in Colombia, Peru, Brazil, and Guatemala. And our great moderator will be Professor Mauricio Cárdenas. Professor Cárdenas is a visiting senior research scholar at the Center of Global Energy Policy at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, where he leads research focused on energy climate policy in Latin America. Thank you all for your presence today, and Professor Cárdenas, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Andres. It's a great pleasure to moderate this panel, and congratulations to you and the students for organizing this Energy Symposium 2021. What a remarkable group of CEOs you have convened. They're not just the CEOs of three of Colombia's most prominent companies. They're good friends, and they are top talent in Colombia. So wonderful to have them in this panel. And the topic couldn't be more interesting and relevant and timely. So I think you're going to enjoy. I'm going to be looking at the chat box on the right-hand side. So if you want to send questions or comments, I'll try to look at them and try to bring them into our conversation. So let's start with Felipe. You know, Ecopetrol is the largest corporation in Colombia, not just state-owned. It's the largest among all of the corporations in Colombia, and it plays a very important role in Colombia's economy. Felipe, why don't we talk about the energy transition and the efforts that Ecopetrol is doing in that regard? Maybe you can put that in the context of the energy transition in Latin America, our challenges, and then specifically what Ecopetrol is doing to accelerate that transition in the case of Colombia. So welcome, and delighted to have you in this panel.
Mauricio, thanks, and good to see you as well, and thank you for the opportunity. And it's great to be able to share this panel with both Juan Ricardo and Bernardo. And good morning or good evening, everyone. So I think there's a couple of reflections I'd like to share. The first one, I think that the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic has shown us that we're very fragile as human beings, and it has accelerated many things, amongst others, digital transformation, but also energy transition, and the quest and the aspiration of people to accelerate the transition. In that sense, there's a few things that we're doing in Ecopetrol, and I'll start by saying that we need to ensure that as part of the recovery from the crisis, we can provide people with the molecules of gas or petrol or oil or the fuels or the energy that they will require in this path of recovery. So from that point of view, there's a couple of things we need to do. One, we need to ensure that we shorten the time to market of the products. So if we make a discovery, we can bring it very, very quickly to the markets. We need to be on the path of decarbonizing our operations and the economy. And I'd like to share, Mauricio, that there's four things that we're focusing on. The first one, becoming every day more and more efficient. And this has to do with, we need to be the last man standing, if you will. We will continue to be focused in oil and gas, but as we become more efficient, we can ensure that our products will reach the markets. And that is underpinned or basically levered by technology, and in particular, digital transformation. The other thing is diversifying our portfolio, which means we need to become a gassier company, produce more and more gas, which is better with the environment than some of the alternatives. We will start this year in a pilot to produce hydrogen, green hydrogen, to start testing the appetite for that, the ability to do that in Colombia, and be part of that pathway of hydrogen. For example, we're starting with renewables in a path to go to 400 megawatts of renewables for self-generation. We're committed to planting 6 million trees. So there's different things we're doing, protecting the core of our business, oil and gas, and doing some additional things. And the other thing I'd like to share is we need to continue to decarbonize. Just to share one data point, over the last 4 years, we've reduced by 52% the amount of gas that we used to flare in our operations. So it's very targeted. And the last thing is this notion of TESG, which is technology and ESG, environmental, social, and governance. The financial markets, the stakeholders, the shareholders are every time more, I think, interested in understanding what the companies are doing around ESG. When we talk about ESG in Ecopetrol, we talk about TESG. So we put technology as something that embraces everything and as a key lever for that transition.
Thank you, Felipe. I'm going to come back to you later, but let me go on now into ISA and bring Bernardo into the conversation. For those of you that are not familiar with ISA, ISA is a holding company that owns several businesses, but quite significantly power transmission or electricity transmission, not just in Colombia, but also in the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And it also owns businesses in other sectors like transportation, concessions in Chile, data transmission, a number of companies. But the core business is power transmission. So Bernardo, how can ISA contribute to the energy transition? How a company that is specialized in power transmission, running the grid, contribute to the effort of the transition in terms of energy for the region?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very honored and pleased to be in this panel. Thank you very much, Professor Cárdenas, and I'm happy to share the panel with Felipe and Juan Ricardo, good friends, and very knowledgeable in this subject. Now, energy transmission, the traditional system of energy transmission, which is the linear effect between generator, distributed transmitters, distributors, and consumers, is changing radically with the new prospects that we're looking forward. Because now we're going to have distributed producers. We're going to have consumers that become prosumers, so consumers that produce energy. And that in the midst of a very present transition towards renewable sources with intermittent and sources of energy, this is a big task for transmission companies. So we have to be resilient, we have to be open to change, and we have to be present, not only to keep on bringing the energy from the huge generated sources, traditional sources, whether water or gas, but we also have to be present in the midst of consumers in the middle of the whole thing. And that means that we have to be, one, very present in the technological transformation of the business. We have to be there in innovating in every step of the line. We need to be present where we have to be digital, making sure that all our equipments, all our assets are connected digitally so we can be present before failures happen. We need to be present in events where the sun or the wind is not present, or events like the recent event in Texas, to make sure that transmission happens even in the midst of huge problems. And that means that transmission companies have to be present internationally between states. In Brazil, we're present in 17 states, and there's huge connectivity between the different states. In Colombia, we do that as well, also in Peru. But we need to further be able to promote international transmission lines so that resiliency happens not only within countries, but through countries that adopt more and more intermittent, non-renewable sources of energy. And this is very important for the international geopolitical discussion, because in the past, countries have protected themselves from other countries coming in to protect them in terms of energy. And this is a big mistake. This is exactly what happened in Texas. Texas was like an island. There was very few connections between Texas and other grids in the United States. And that was one of the main reasons why Texas had such huge problems. But that's happening internationally, you know, and there's countries that are leading the way. The Nordic countries in Europe lead the way to be able to promote international transmission lines to be present, where the growth of non-renewables become more and more present.
Absolutely. Well, this is a very powerful message, which is, and I heard this before from you at a panel we had at the World Economic Forum, energy integration is indispensable for the energy transition, because the more integrated we are, and we're talking here about Latin America, the easier it would be to develop these energy sources based on renewables, and particularly on unconventional or non-conventional renewables. So this is a powerful message, important for the Biden administration as it looks into ways to re-engage in the region, because supporting this energy integration could be fundamental for the energy transition. But let me bring into the conversation Juan Ricardo. Juan Ricardo is the CEO of Grupo de Energía de Bogotá, GEB, also a holding company, and a holding company that owns several businesses in the energy generation, energy distribution, also transmission, and also in the natural gas sector with transportation of natural gas, not just in Colombia, but in other parts of the region, including Peru. So, Juan Ricardo, a broad set of businesses, but I'd like to focus you on the demand side, since you have a wide base of customers in the city of Bogotá and the surrounding areas. And how can this energy transition be accelerated from the point of view of the demand side? What are you doing with consumers to ensure that we transition into less use of fossil fuels?
Thank you, Mauricio. It is really a great pleasure to be here, and not just seeing you again, but among great friends like Felipe, Bernardo, and Andres. Thank you. I think it's a pleasure to be part of the panel. Let me, before I jump into that, follow on what Bernardo said. And we believe strongly that being constructive in this transition, you need to look at gas, transportation, and electricity transmission as complementary businesses. You will need to have quick ways to generate energy to keep the system running when you are using intermittent sources of power like solar or wind. And that is instrumental to look at the changes that regulation must bring forward in order for these sectors to be able to operate simultaneously in a more complementary way. And that is the only way that we can really bring that change. And gas, as Felipe said, has to be a key element of the transition. We're not seeing regulations nor messages clear to the public that allows people to understand that while China and India are investing billions of dollars in bringing coal power generation, gas is a much better alternative, much cleaner. And in Latin America, the biggest sources of CO2 emissions equivalent is transportation. We're not the big industrial powerhouses as India and China might be. It's transport where you have the biggest impact. And bringing change to transport requires changes in regulation. You need to bring the right stimuli in order to get trucks to shift from diesel, which has huge impact on emissions, to electricity, which is going to take a while, but in the meantime to gas. Gas in big transport is there, and you would reduce 60% emissions if you were to implement that, but you are not getting the messages because gas as a market is not as well developed. And that is one of our challenges from the point of view of distribution. How do you get people to understand that there are alternatives out there that might not be perfect, but that would work very quickly with huge impact on the environment and the quality of air in the cities? When you look at the statistics from the COVID, one of the things that you learn is how damaging are particle emissions from coal and diesel on the environment, particularly in big cities like Bogota. You could clearly see the impacts on the public health of young children, that their problems with their lungs dropped dramatically when most people stopped. That can be resolved 100% if gas were to be pushed in most of the transport system. And motorcycles can be moving to electricity very quickly, but you have to get the right incentives and the right messages. So that's one of the highest priorities on our side, bringing the city to complement the activities of the company. You know, our partner is Enel. You were a former CEO of this company, so you know very well. You should have said that at the beginning, that you were the CEO of Empresa Energía de Bogotá a long time ago. And you know that our key complement is Enel, which is the Italian company that runs the distribution of electricity and the generation on behalf of the Grupo Energía de Bogotá. And they are working very closely with the city in two dimensions. One, creating an optical network throughout the city that would allow the smart meters to come forward in Bogota. As Bernardo said very clearly, bringing the consumer, that is going to be the prosumer, into the market is key for efficiency decisions to be taken. We need people to begin to be conscious of their use of energy. And for that, for them to shift from gas and oil-run vehicles into electricity, you need to give them the opportunity to choose the time of the night where they can load the charge of their car at the lowest price. For you need significant messages on the regulatory side for people to begin to have prices by the interval of the hour where they are using the different appliances or the loading of their vehicle. So for that, you need an excellent optical network, and that is one of the big investments on behalf of ETB and Codensa. And on the other side, you have to develop the network of public transport run on electricity. And for that, you need huge investments in infrastructure. And that one last message. We are having a lot of problems communicating to people that electricity is not a public health hazard. There are a lot of misinformation on the network, telling people that you can get leukemia, that you can get cancer if you're close to a substation, that power lines are dangerous, which they are dangerous if you were to touch them, but they are pretty high above land. And you need that infrastructure to be built in order to bring all the load that is needed for cities to bring that transition forward. So that's what we're focusing on. And as Felipe said, reducing fugitive emissions from the gas. The gas network requires significant investments in measuring and controlling those fugitive emissions. That way, the methane that might be dropped into the air can be reduced drastically. For that, you need a lot of statistics allowing people to know that it's being measured correctly and the right decisions are being taken to cut that out.
Thank you, Juan Ricardo. Well, you bring an issue. I'm going to come back to it. You know, we will need 2 hours at least with each one of you individually, because the topics and the issues are so important and so interesting. I'm going to come back to you on the electrification of transport and the role that GEB is playing in the city of Bogota. And we can talk a bit about natural gas as well. I'm going to ask Felipe about that because, as you all know, Ecopetrol is the largest producer of natural gas in the country, and we are running out of reserves. So I think it's important to bring that. But I wanted to connect Felipe with the conversation about energy transmission, because it's been public that Ecopetrol has an interest in acquiring ISA. So how does this fit in your plans for an energy transition in Ecopetrol? What's the value you see in this transaction, and why the interest of Ecopetrol in bringing ISA into its portfolio?
Mauricio, thanks for the opportunity. And I'd like to say a couple things before I go straight into the answer. One is that there's not one single path for energy transition. It may be different paths in different parts of the world and done differently by different governments and countries. And the other thing is that transitions need to be done in an orderly fashion. We can't stop everything today and try to start something new. We need to evolve and basically transition into something in the next 10, 20, 30 years. From that point of view, there's two basic trends that we're seeing. One, decarbonization, that we're talking a lot today about, and the other one is electrification. And I think Bernardo mentioned it in spades, you know, in terms of how the markets will change, how the prosumers will have a different role to play. So from that point of view, we see the opportunity of, in the non-binding offer for the 51.4% equity that the government owns in ISA, as an opportunity to basically, by bringing the two companies together, create a more stable, resilient, naturally hedged company that has regional presence. And from in that sense, Mauricio, ISA is a company that we admire, that has done great things in the past decades and few last years in terms of growing its business and ensuring that it has a very relevant presence of leadership in different parts of the region. So we want to learn from that. And I'll share something with you. For every unit of EBITDA, and this is 2019 numbers, ISA emitted only 1% of the equivalent emissions that Ecopetrol had to emit to produce that same unit of EBITDA. So when people ask me, does that make sense in terms of combining the companies? And I say, absolutely. It's about that road to electrifying. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, Mauricio, is to, by providing energy to the people, we can continue to close the gaps that we have today in society, and we can underpin or be part of the backbone for the recovery. So again, a company that is very well run, that has a very well applied and implemented strategy, a world-class resource from the point of the human resource. So we're very happy with that. Still, the process needs to continue. And I think as we are able to talk more to stakeholders and analysts and the likes, people say, wow, we understand now the merits of this strategic move that is good for ISA, is good for Ecopetrol, is good for Colombia, and is good for our shareholders. So we do believe this is about thinking about the Ecopetrol for the company in the next 20, 30 years. We won't lose focus on oil and gas. It's part of energy security for Colombia. It's fundamental for the recovery, but it's trying to have this vision of what the markets and how Colombia can continue to evolve in the next 20 to 30 years.
Thank you, Felipe. Let me come back to you, Bernardo. I'm not going to ask you about this transaction.
Thank you.
Let's focus on the value of ISA in the future, because we talked about the energy integration, and I think a lot of it depends on political issues, as you mentioned. And I think that's an important aspect that anyone that is looking at ISA should consider, the possibility or not to integrate with Central America through Panama, or towards the south of the continent through Ecuador to Peru and Chile. But how do you see the prospects for that type of integration? And if not, what are your plans in terms of expansion, in terms not just of markets, new markets, but also in terms of improving the quality of the grid, so that the transmission is more efficient, there's less waste of energy, and there's more opportunities also for independent suppliers of energy to connect to the grid. So what are your plans into the future?
Well, the beauty of Latin America is that it has a lot of growth space. There's many things to be done still. There's wide areas of population and of countries within Latin America that are still unconnected. And of course, that has a direct relationship with poverty, with education, and with getting the very high levels of inequality in the region be more equal. And I think that large infrastructure, but very specifically energy transmission, has to do a lot with that. So the good news is that there's still a lot to do. Not even mentioning countries that haven't had any investments in energy infrastructure in the past 12 or 15 years. And I mentioned very specifically countries like Venezuela, who at the beginning of the 2000s had the more advanced energy system, transmission system in Latin America, and it hasn't done any investments for many years. So there's huge potential there. And also Argentina. Argentina needs to do a lot more investments in infrastructure in general. But even in the countries where we're present now, which is, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Brazil, and Bolivia, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done. And as a matter of fact, the interest on the investor side, both financial players and incumbents or technical industry players, has been seen in the recent transactions that we've seen across the region. So we're very happy. We have a plan that spans from 2019 to 2030. Very specific plan, very well designed, that started by having 12 of the best experts in the world to let us know what their view of the energy world would look in 2040 and 50. We integrated that plan into a very sound business plan with KPIs, with strategies that has an amount of $12.5 billion investment across our different businesses in the region from here to 2030. And that's going very well. We're very happy with that. So there's a lot to do. And in fact, if what you say about international transmission integration happens, the more. So there's a lot of space for us to grow. But on the back of that, two more aspects. One, technology and digitization. Blockchain systems to manage data. There's that's key, and that gives us also a space for growth. And last but not least, everything I've said has to be supported by sustainability. We cannot be profitable if we're not sustainable. And that's part and parcel of our 2030 strategy. As a matter of fact, our transmission companies are carbon neutral today, and we hope to have all our businesses be carbon neutral within the next couple of years. We're going to also have 11 million tons of CO2 supported by us, so we become a very green company. But we also know that we impact in one way or the other 200 million consumers in Latin America, and we're present, understanding their needs and making sure that our motto, which is connections that inspire, is present in everything we do.
Thank you, Bernardo. Well, you brought into the conversation the issue of energy poverty, and I see a triangle here, which is, I guess, the basis for any strategy, certainly in the three companies that you represent, which is reducing energy poverty that still exists in the region and in Colombia, promoting the energy transition, and at the same time developing more energy integration. So if we are able to do these three things together and they complement each other, I think the more successful the companies you head are going to be. Let me come back to Juan Ricardo. So in your previous remarks, you had two kind of like messages. One is that we have to promote the gasification of transportation, especially for the trucking business, but also the electrification.
Yep.
And electrification more in the context of public transportation, but also private vehicles. So are you promoting these two strategies sequentially, or is this an idea that the two strategies can be combined at the same time? You can do gasification in some sectors and electrification in others. That's one aspect I'm curious about the strategy of the Grupo Energía de Bogotá. But I also have heard you, and you're an active user of Twitter on the issue of the transaction of ISA. And I think it will be completely unfair if I don't tell you, if you can tell us what your arguments are for that process to be more open, so that companies like yours can participate as well. So what's your interest in ISA? Why do you think there is an interest? Why do you think it's a good complement for your own strategy? So.
Okay, perfect, Mauricio. Those are very, very good questions. Let me begin by the easy one, the first one. Definitely, you should move forward in both. The city of Bogota is trying to electrify most of the transport, but you need to get the trucks to shift into gas, and for that you need clear messages. It cannot be done in one day. You need to give the long-term signals that you want them to move quickly into gas. You cannot transform a motor from gas, petrol, to just natural gas over a day. You lose a lot of the efficiency. You need to buy a new truck that is being built to use natural gas from the start. For that, you need the process of the old vehicles being taken out of the market and being replaced by the new ones. You need the right incentives. And these people are not the wealthiest ones, particularly most of the meat truckers. You need to give clear incentives on behalf of the government for that to happen. And on the other hand, there has to be a carrot stick approach. You have to create and make it much costly for them to have gasoline run vehicles. And for that, the carbon tax that you introduce has to be stepped up gradually for the next 10, 15 years. That there has to be a message that the $170 per kilo of carbon, that is a goal. That we have to reach that level at some point. It not be tomorrow, but in a decade or 2 decades for sure. We have to let people know that we don't want those diesel vehicles around contaminating the cities at some point. It has to be gradual. And for the ones that are from the poorest backgrounds, you have to give them incentives for them to be able to shift. But definitely something that must be done quickly. And the messages have to be out today, not tomorrow. So you have the time to adjust, because this is happening. Now, when you look at the changes in climate already in Colombia, when you go to the Guajira, the increase on very high temperatures, that is not something in 10 years, it's happening now. And when you look at the statistics, you can reach temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius over 30% of the year. If that were to happen, the impact is going to be dramatic. Literally, whole populations will have to shift their ways of life. So we need to begin change in these areas very quickly. And particularly the trucks are a key area. And the control of the emissions is really pathetic. You know, when you drive around Colombia, as I'm doing now, you are clearly looking how these people are not controlling the level of emissions at all throughout the country. So you can do things now if there is the will.
Now, why
ISA? That would be the way to create that complementarity between gas transport and electricity transmission. I strongly believe the electricity sector is going to be a huge winner. There are expected 16 million kilometers of investment in transmission lines. And to have a partner like ISA would allow us to bring not just from Latin America, but going to the US or Europe, where investments are needed, because most of the renewables are not near the cities, as opposed to a thermo turbine that can be placed anywhere. Wind and heat are where they are, no? In Morocco, in Algiers, in La Guajira. So you need huge infrastructures. In the next couple of decades, there are going to be huge investments in that sector. And being the two companies in Colombia and in the region that control most of those assets, putting them together would make a lot of sense. But it would make sense as well to have Ecopetrol, the Zenit part, as a complementary one, because you have to have all those transportation and transmission. You can make a huge company that is focused on this key element of the transmission, which is giving people access to the energy source, either hydrogen or gas, or electricity. And for that, you need the networks that allows for that energy to reach the houses, the cities where it is needed, the companies. And having that all throughout the region would give Colombia a very strong company that would be very competitive. We don't see Ecopetrol out either, no? It could be something that the three companies together could build, and you would have a powerhouse for the future, which is going to be one of the most critical sectors in the world in
Thank
the
you.
next 2 decades.
Interesting insight. I'm going to refrain. I'm just the moderator. I'm going to refrain from making editorial comments. But if I were allowed to make just one, not related to the ESA transaction, is related to something you said in this last answer, which has to do with the carbon tax. I certainly feel very proud of having introduced as finance minister the carbon tax in Colombia, a $5 per ton of CO2 tax. And I fully agree with you that we have to continue increasing the carbon tax. And I hope you support and everyone supports the government in that effort. I have to say that I was not able to include in the tax base of the carbon tax natural gas. And I think natural gas is certainly an emitter of CO2, and there's no reason for natural gas to be exempt from the carbon tax. We were able to introduce the tax on natural gas as it is used by the refineries. So Ecopetrol pays a carbon tax on the natural gas it uses in the refineries and in the petrochemical business as well, but not in transportation, not in manufacturing, not certainly in residential use. And I think that's something where an improvement needs to be made, because that was one exemption that creates a hole in the carbon tax. Talking about natural gas, I didn't mean this to be a topic of the conversation really, but it's so important, and especially Juan Ricardo has mentioned the idea of the gasification. And I'd like to ask Felipe, how are we doing in terms of the exploration of natural gas? Because everyone knows that our fields, especially in the Guajira, are maturing very fast. So should we embark in a strategy for gasification at this stage?
So Mauricio, the first thing is that I'd like to share with the people that are participating today that last year, Ecopetrol invested $2.7 billion. This year, 2021, we want to invest $4 billion. So point number one, we're increasing our CapEx, our investment, by 50%. Over the next 3 years, our investments could reach $15 billion. Out of those, $1.3 billion are exclusively dedicated to gas, just to highlight the importance of gas. And what are we doing? We're looking at the fields in the Casanare, so Cusiana, Cupiagua, Pauto, Floreña, all the gas train in Casanare, the Piedemonte train. We want to produce more out of that region, and it basically provides the market through Juan Ricardo's TGI tubes or gas pipelines, 50 or 60% of the consumption in any given day. So a lot of work being done in Casanare, lot of work being done in Middle Magdalena, a lot of work in the continental Caribbean coast of Colombia, and a lot of work in the offshore. We want to drill one of the largest wells ever drilled in Colombia by the end of this year to appraise, which is basically understand how big the fields are in Golfo de Morrosquillo next to Panama. And we want to produce the well to get dynamic production data. And if Colombia has less than 4 TCF of gas in terms of reserves, this could be 8, 10 to 12 TCF, just to give you a sense of the amount of gas that we think is available. So gas is very important, but I want to link it to something. And I was looking at the chat, lots of questions around hydrogen. So we're bringing our first electrolyzer this year into the Research Institute, and we want to produce green hydrogen. So using renewable energy, doing electrolysis on water, we want to produce hydrogen. And one of the things that we want to do is to start testing the blend of hydrogen into the gas. You know, we'll do this with the government, the regulators, and it would be like having additional reserves. So it's starting to use hydrogen in gas. It could be used for generation. It could be used industrially. It could be used for transportation. So in terms of the transition, linking it back to the first part of the conversation, gas is fundamental. It's going to be with us for many, many years, but we need to start looking at some other things as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I really commend you for getting interested. I saw Juan Ricardo also was interested in hydrogen. I saw some remarks previously. You know, we at the Energy Center at Columbia have the best experts in the world on hydrogen, people like Julio Friedman. And we should bring that conversation. We did an event in Chile, which was very successful. We need to do something in Colombia, but we need government money into this. This is really a sector where there are lots of there are lots of investment that needs to take place in a public-private partnership to really succeed. Look, there is Andres. How much more time do we have, just to make sure?
We have about 15 minutes.
12.
Okay, so we probably have time for another round. But Felipe, I'll come back to you on a question that is here in the chat, but I want to direct it more towards Bernardo, which has to do with the corporate governance of ISA. Look, I've been in the board of directors of Ecopetrol, in the board of directors of ISA at different points in my life, CEO of Energía de Bogotá, as Juan Ricardo said. So I love these companies. I know them very well. I'm the proudest Colombian that we have these three companies. But if I were to highlight one aspect about ISA, it's remarkable. Basically, I think the best in Colombia in terms of corporate governance. It started very early with this. The others have followed and have done, great work as well. But ISA stands out. So I think the one aspect about the potential transaction is preserving the corporate governance of ISA. I think that would be fundamental. What would you highlight in terms of your corporate governance, Bernardo, that you think is fundamental for the success of ISA?
Well, it's a very easy point to follow if you look at the history of ISA, because ISA in the past 20 some years has only had 3 CEOs, and it has always been a government-controlled company. So that attests for the fact that the governments in the past have been very careful and protective of that. And why? The reason why ISA in the past 5 years has jumped from a stock price of around 6,000 pesos to almost 30,000 pesos, so that's almost a 6-fold change, has to do with the corporate governance. Because investors trust that the decisions that are taken in ISA are autonomous, are independent, and follow very clear corporate design. So that's what gives value to ISA. So if that's the fact, and corporate governance is the basic support of all that, it would be completely counterintuitive for a buyer of ISA stock or a controlling state of ISA stock to intervene in its corporate governance. It will only decrease its value for him. And I'm sure that whoever buys it, if Ecopetrol does or whoever else, is going to pay a healthy sum for that. So it's in their best interest to protect ISA in its autonomy and its corporate governance. And the good thing about what I've heard coming from Felipe himself is that he's very keen in understanding this equation. And he's pointed out publicly and privately to me and to everybody that I know he speaks to about this fact, whereby if you protect ISA in its autonomy and corporate governance, you protect your investment. It's a very clear equation. It's very simple. And indeed, a company like ISA is improbable, because even being government controlled, it's been winning prizes in corporate governance, competing with private corporations for the past 10 years. So it's a case at hand in how to do it well. Both Juan Ricardo and Felipe have spoken to me about following our path in that respect. They're both committed to that because they understand that within their own companies, this is also a key factor. So I'm very confident that in the future that's going to be supported, cared for, and remained as it is.
Thank you. Juan Ricardo, there's one aspect in your comments about ISA that you did not mention today that I've heard before, which is about price formation, the ability to allow the markets to form the price of ISA. We know the evaluation that the market provides, ISA trades, but you've made the case that competition is always good to reveal the right price. So I think that argument, I'm just mentioning it because I've seen you put it forward several times. But I want to ask you on a separate kind of like related line is this. interest on the part of the government to sell assets. And the government still owns a number of power distribution companies in the markets of Meta, Huila, Nariño, Caquetá, the electrificadoras. Wouldn't that be a very natural investment for Grupo de Energía de Bogotá?
It is. And we've offered to do that. We're ready to purchase those as well. The thing is, as any good buyer, you want to buy some bone if it has some meat. That's why we had asked if ISA was part of the package, it would make a lot more sense. But definitely, we would be interested in buying some of those, and we're ready to do so. We have already spoken with our partners, and we can take control of those companies and make them more efficient, and clearly, there are gains from that. And it would make a lot of sense.
It would. And just for the information of the audience, the last electrificadora that was sold under my time as well as minister was Electrificadora de Boyacá. And if you look at the indicators of performance, it is impressive how it has improved. So the idea of these companies being run directly by the national government is perhaps not the best one. It's in the interest of what you call prosumers to have these companies well managed and run by experts. So we're coming to the end. I think I'd like to ask each one of you to make a final closing comment. I think we only have a few minutes, so the briefest you are, the better. So, Felipe.
So, couple thoughts, Mauricio. One, there's not one single path for the transition. Different paths will be taken. But I think we need to understand that it's fundamental that we continue to decarbonize and we continue to electrify the world. And some of the questions in the chat talk about inequality or energy poverty. And I think Bernardo referred to those topics very well. Reinforce the commitment from Ecopetrol for energy security and ensuring that Colombians in particular will have access to high quality products in terms of fuels or gas, which are fundamental as we continue to evolve in the transition. Just one data point, each Colombian is responsible for 5 tons of CO2 emitted every year. It's not a problem only for government or for companies or for regulators. It's a problem for everyone. So our commitment in Ecopetrol to continue to drive the transition, do it through the lens of TESG, technology, environmental, social, and governance, reinforcing transparency in terms of how we report what we're doing, and share with the audience that recently, as part of our presence in the World Economic Forum, Ecopetrol was the first Latin American company, only Latin American company and only Colombian company to adhere to the stakeholder capitalism metrics. It's going to be a journey, but it will provide additional transparency. And I think people are urging for that. There's expectations that we tell openly what we're doing, what our plans are, and that we share in that sense. And our commitment to continue to provide energy, as we are fully convinced that it will help us close the gaps that we have today and underpin and support the recovery that is much needed.
Thank you, Felipe. Bernardo, last comments. I want to encourage you to make a reference to something we didn't talk about, which is ISA's recent interest in concessions, in road concessions. How does this fit in the overall strategy?
Let me address that quickly first and then go back to some conclusions. The road concession business, which we've had for the past 11 years now, we just entered Colombia, but we've been the leaders in Chile in suburban highways for the past 10 years, is key to our diversification strategy. And it's proven in the past 10 years the importance of having that alternative to be able to have diversified sources of income. And that's one of the main reasons why we've been so profitable, because we have a diversified grid that allows us to be resilient even in times where a business like transmission is hit by regulation, which has happened to us very dearly and very costly in Brazil in 2000 and elsewhere. So For a regulated business as transmission, having the highway alternative is very important in a well-diversified income alternative. So that's number one. And in terms of the conclusions, a couple things. We need to be dependable. We need to be resilient in the verge of the new world of energy, where we're going to have electric vehicles connected to highways. We're going to have more and more renewables in the grid. We need to be more dependable and more resilient. And that has to do with technology and to build more transmission lines. That number one. Number two, to do that, it's necessary to involve new technologies, storage, and several alternatives to maintain voltage that have come on board by new technologies, which allows us to not necessarily have new generation alternatives, but have new equipments that support us in the verge of intermittent energy flow.
Thank you.
Number three,
Thank you.
very important because Juan Ricardo mentioned it, regulation. We need regulators to be on top of this because it's because of them that we'll be able to evolve. Regulation lags a bit behind us. We need them to be a little bit more forward. And finally, international integration, which needs geopolitics and needs everybody talking about this.
Good. Well, thank you. Juan Ricardo, you have the last word. And let me ask for a bonus question on top of your closing remarks. Can we see Grupo de Energía Bogotá buying electric buses and leasing them to Transmilenio and to other providers of public transportation?
We're doing that through Enel, and it's been approved in the board, and we bought the first 600 buses last December. Yeah, definitely. And we're moving forward as well in public lining. There are huge savings and opportunities there, and you know that it's one of the sectors with the most corruption in Colombia. So developing lines that you can allow municipalities to reduce cost and to get a more transparent service, that's another area that we're working with Enel very strongly. But let me finish with one message, and just following up on what Bernardo says. Regulation is going to be key and is lagging behind. You need to look forward at how things are changing, and you need to adapt quickly. The times for regulation are being too long, and they are not well designed and with broad input from people that are experts from other areas of the world. Now, in Colombia, we don't have all the knowledge to get this done quickly. So you need to bring more people into the process to make sure you do it right. And there is one thing that makes me very concerned. We're trying to do models to try to understand what we are talking about energy transition and what that would create and the impact it would have on reality. And what they are saying so far, it would totally make gas unviable in Colombia. What are the current proposals on how Colombia is going to transition? It makes gas a sector that is going to be one of the biggest losers. And why is that? We're not looking at the whole problem in a comprehensive way. Deforestation is the big discussion in Latin America. And you need to create information for people to know what is going on to create awareness. There are technologies out there that allows to measure the distance from the floor up to 2 meters. You could tell in real time, almost daily, where trees or where illegal housing is being built all around the region. If you don't create the consciousness and the incentives for people to stop deforestation, that is where the greatest impact on carbon emissions are in Latin America. In the case of Colombia, over 60% of our impact comes from that area, not from oil, not from gas, not even from transport, which is the one that has the biggest carbon impact. We need to have the right support to the families that are living on the frontier and to give the incentives to be able not to plant trees. I disagree with Felipe on that a little bit, to create the right biodiversity by recovering the natural ecosystems in the places where productive activity is not likely to flourish. And for that, you need a lot of input from the government, not just on the information part on the incentives, but to focus resources in those populations that are marginal, very poor, and are destroying the frontier. And that is where the biggest impact is. If we don't do that, there is not going to be room for the gas business in Colombia in the near future. So you need to act on that dimension.
Thank you. Well, I think we ran out of time. Andres, I'm going to hand it back to you. It's been wonderful to moderate this. And as you can see, I'm a very proud Colombian. And part of that is because we have these 3 great companies and we have these 3 great professionals running them. So this speaks great about our country. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you very much for your participants. Please stay connected for the rest of the symposium. We still have our fireside chat in 3 minutes and our late afternoon panels. Thank you so much and have a good day.